The morning was quiet in the way only small towns can be. A blanket of fog hung over the narrow roads of rural Washington, softening the silhouettes of tall pines that lined the edges of the woods. The sun hadn't yet broken through the grey, and dew still clung to blades of grass, to mailboxes, to the hoods of parked cars. A patrol car crept along the empty road, its headlights cutting through mist that moved like breath. Inside, 2 deputies, partners for years, moved in practiced silence. No chatter, no radio, just the rhythm of the tyres on asphalt and the hum of the engine beneath them. It was a routine morning patrol, slow, uneventful, familiar, until they saw her. She appeared out of the fog like a ghost, old, slow-moving and deliberate. A dog, broad-chested and greying, stood firmly in the centre of the road. The deputies barely had time to react before the brakes squealed softly and the cruiser rolled to a stop. The dog didn't flinch. She didn't bark, didn't growl. She just stood there, still as stone, eyes fixed on the vehicle like she was waiting. "Is she blocking us?" one of them muttered, leaning forward, squinting through the windshield. What the hell? They sat for a moment, unsure. The dog made no move to run. Her body language was calm but alert, ears perked, tail stiff, gaze unwavering. "Looks old," the driver said. "She hurt, maybe? Lost?" The passenger reached for the door handle. Something's not right. Outside, the air was brisk. The deputy stepped onto the pavement, hands low, voice gentle. "Hey, girl, you okay?" The dog took a few steps backward, then stopped, looked back, then forward again, then back. The deputy hesitated. She turned again and started walking away, slowly, not running, just far enough to stay ahead, then pausing, looking over her shoulder. "What the... is she trying to... lead us?" It wasn't something they saw every day. Not here. Not ever. A lone dog, this deliberate, this focused. The deputy called out to her again. No response. She kept walking, weaving just off the road, back into the edge of the trees. He turned to his partner in the car. "I'm going to follow her." The other nodded. The deputy ducked under low branches and followed the old dog into the woods. Boots crunching on frost-bitten leaves. The dog glanced back again, then kept moving, just fast enough to make him keep pace. The forest swallowed the sound of the road behind him. No cars, no people, just the hush of the trees and the steady sound of paws on dirt. She didn't act wild. She didn't stray. She moved with a purpose, always looking back to make sure he was there. 10 minutes passed. 15. Still, she led. The fog thinned a little as they moved deeper, and the forest opened slightly. The deputy kept walking, heart ticking faster now. He didn't know what he was expecting. A den? A litter? A person? Then the dog stopped. She stood by a thick patch of ferns, tail still, ears up. She looked at him just once, then at the ground beside her. The deputy stepped closer. That's when he saw it. A shoe. A motionless leg. And then the face of an elderly man, pale and still, partially hidden beneath the undergrowth, his skin grey with cold and the brush of hours gone by. The deputy dropped to his knees. "Sir? Can you hear me? Sir?" He reached for his radio. His voice cracked. "I've got a downed male, late 80s, unconscious, requesting immediate medical." The dog didn't move. She just sat down beside the man, like she'd been keeping watch, like she'd known this moment would come. He looked at her then, for the first time, really looked. She met his eyes. She had never said a word. Didn't need to. And somehow she had said everything. He stayed kneeling beside the man while the forest wrapped them in its cold hush. The old man's chest moved, barely, but it moved. Faint, shallow breaths, spaced out like time itself, had begun to slow. His skin was cold to the touch, his face streaked with dirt, his forehead bearing a dark scrape where it had met a stone. The deputy pressed his hand gently to the man's neck. A pulse. Weak, thready. But there. He exhaled, radio still clutched in his other hand. "Subject is alive. Repeat. He's alive. Appears to be unconscious, possible hypothermia and head trauma." Static crackled, then the reply, "Rescue en route. ETA 20. He glanced down at the dog again. She hadn't moved. She sat like a sentry beside the man, gaze unmoving, posture alert but calm. Her coat was muddy, her back legs trembling slightly, not with fear but fatigue. She'd been at this a while. He reached for his jacket and unzipped it halfway, then draped it over the old man's upper body. The air was growing colder by the minute. "What's your name, huh?" he murmured to the dog. "Where'd you come from?" She blinked slowly, then looked at the man beside her. Not him. She didn't care about him. She was here for someone else. The deputy leaned in closer to the injured man. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man didn't stir. "Sir, I need you to hang on. Help is coming." The dog rose slowly and circled around them once before returning to her position. He noticed now how old she was, her hind legs bowed with age, patches of white dotting her muzzle, one ear a little crumpled. But in those eyes there was no resignation, only urgency. She had come to get him. She had crossed a road and stood in front of a car and led a stranger through the woods, because somehow she'd known. Somehow she'd refused to leave her person behind. The deputy stood and paced a few steps to scan the surrounding woods. The fall must have been recent, maybe during a morning walk. There were no paths out here, no trail markers, just wild, uneven terrain. He could see the slight disturbance in the brush, where the man must have tumbled, his foot catching on a root, maybe his body sliding down a shallow incline. From where the man had fallen, there was no chance he could have pulled himself up. And shouting? Out here? Even if someone passed nearby, the forest would have swallowed his voice whole, if not for her. The deputy's eyes flicked back to the dog. He turned and keyed the radio again. Subject was located due to the intervention of a dog. Repeat, dog appears to have alerted us and led us to the site. Mark that for the record. Copy that, came the voice on the other end. In the distance he heard the faint whine of sirens. They were close. The dog pricked her ears and stood. As the paramedics arrived, boots crunching against damp leaves, flashlights slicing through the fog, she backed away just enough to give them space. She watched them work with a focus that made the hairs on his arms rise. One medic approached the deputy. "You found him like this?" He nodded, then gestured toward the dog. "She did." "I just followed." The medic looked down at her, incredulous. "She yours?" "No, I think she's his." The man was stabilized. An oxygen mask slipped over his mouth, his vitals taken. They lifted him onto the stretcher carefully, and when they began to wheel him away, the dog stood. She followed, not clinging, not whining, just present. The paramedics didn't stop her. No one could. She walked alongside the stretcher like a solemn guardian, head level, step for step. At the edge of the woods where the ambulance waited, the deputy paused. He looked at her. Really looked. "You coming with us?" She glanced at him once, then kept walking. She jumped into the back of the ambulance without needing to be lifted, curled up at the man's feet and laid her head gently beside his hand. The doors closed, the sirens wailed, and they disappeared into the mist. He stood there for a long time, the fog swirling in their wake, the forest growing still again. And he couldn't stop thinking about her, that old dog, that quiet, tired sentinel, who had known something he hadn't, who had made herself heard, without a single sound. The hospital lights were a different kind of quiet, fluorescent, steady, pale. They didn't flicker like firelight or dance like sun through trees. They just existed, humming low above sterile hallways, casting the same shade of white over everything. Room 208 was tucked at the end of a corridor in the older wing. A single bed, a side table with untouched gelatin, and a heart monitor pulsing slow and deliberate. The old man lay there, skin pale, lips slightly parted, one hand resting limply beside him. At his feet, curled on a folded blanket brought by a nurse, lay Gita. She hadn't moved since she jumped into the ambulance. The EMTs had looked at each other, confused but unwilling to protest. No one had the heart to push her out. Even as the stretcher bumped and the monitors beeped, she'd stayed curled near his boots, silent and watchful. Now, in the dim hush of the hospital room, she kept her vigil. Eyes open, ears flicking at every noise in the hallway. She hadn't eaten, barely drank, just watched. The nurses started calling her the old girl. They brought her bowls of water, small treats from their lunches, blankets when she shivered in her sleep. But she never left the room. Not once. Even when they changed linens or checked vitals or moved machines, she stayed close to the man in the bed. Doctors said it was touch and go. A mild stroke, dehydration, a nasty head wound. The fall had done more damage than it first appeared. They weren't sure how long he'd been lying out there in the cold. A few more hours, they said, and it might have been too late. The deputies stopped by later that day. They brought a small gift bag with treats and a plush toy that looked like a raccoon. Gita didn't touch it. She was waiting. On the third day, his fingers twitched. The nurse, startled, leaned closer. Then his eyes fluttered. He blinked. Once, twice, then they opened. slow, confused, but open. She was on her feet before anyone else noticed. No bark, no cry, just standing there, tail low and wagging slow, like a flag moving in a wind no one else could feel. He turned his head slightly, the effort written across his forehead. "Gita?" he croaked. Her ears perked. She took a step closer, then another. She laid her head gently across his chest. His hand rose, trembling, and found her fur. The nurse swallowed hard and stepped out to give them the room. Later, when the doctor came in, he explained the fall, the rescue, the dog. "She came and got us," the deputy said, "stood in the middle of the road, made us stop, wouldn't let us pass." The man nodded slowly, tears welling. I told her to go get help," he whispered. "I couldn't move. I thought I was dying." He looked at Gita, who had settled beside him again, and she listened. The story spread. First to hospital staff, then local media. An old man, a fall. An old dog who wouldn't leave his side, who ran into the road and stopped a police cruiser, who led them through the woods, who waited, watched, never left. The paper ran a front-page photo. Gita on the hospital bed, chin on his chest, both of them fast asleep. "Loyalty beyond words," the headline read. Calls came in, reporters, offers for interviews, donations, even a few from out of state asking to adopt her if the man couldn't keep her. But he could, and he would. By the end of the week, he was strong enough to sit upright. Gita lay beside him in the wheelchair during hallway walks. Every nurse, every visitor, every patient smiled when they passed. And every night, when the lights dimmed and the machines hummed, she curled up beside him, nose tucked beneath his elbow. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need a medal. She had done what needed to be done. Because love doesn't always come wrapped in ceremony. Sometimes it has 4 legs, a white muzzle, and a heart that refuses to leave your side, even when you ask it to, especially when you ask it to. He came home the following week, wheeled slowly through the sliding hospital doors under a sky that felt larger than he remembered. The autumn air hit him like a memory, crisp and wood-scented, alive with birdsong and the rustle of dry leaves skipping across pavement. Gita rode beside him in the van arranged by a volunteer. She sat upright in the back seat, one paw on the ledge, her eyes scanning the trees like she was making sure everything was just where they'd left it. When the van pulled into the long gravel driveway, she leapt out before anyone opened the door. She circled the yard once, checking, sniffing, remembering, before returning to his side and sitting, tail curled around her back legs. The ramp was new, built by neighbours who had read the story and showed up the next day with tools and plywood. There was a handrail now, and the old front steps were gone. He wheeled himself up slowly, his right hand still weak, but steady enough. At the top he paused, and Gita sat beside him. The house looked smaller somehow, quieter. Inside nothing had moved. The same chair by the window, the same coat on the hook. But the air felt different, like the walls had been holding their breath, waiting. He sat by the window for a long time that afternoon. The sun filtered through the glass and warmed his shoulders. Gita lay on the floor nearby, her chin resting on his slipper, eyes closed but ears flicking at every sound. He thought back to the day they met. She'd been 8 then. An older girl at the shelter, part German shepherd, part something else. Her coat dull, her eyes unsure. No one wanted an 8-year-old dog with a bad hip and a crooked tail. He did. He hadn't gone in looking for her. He didn't even know why he went that day. He'd just felt like it. The volunteer had brought her out, said her name was Gita, and that she didn't do much. She didn't bark, didn't play fetch, just followed you around, a quiet dog for a quiet man. He'd watched her for a moment, how she stood next to him without leaning in, how her eyes tracked everything, how she didn't make herself smaller just to be liked. They'd gone home together that day. Over the years, they fell into rhythm. Morning walks, late dinners, afternoons on the porch. She never begged, never barked. Just stayed close, like she knew things she couldn't say. The forest trail had been their favourite, a narrow, meandering path that led through a stand of firs and opened into a field of ferns. He always let her off leash out there. She never ran. She never had to be called twice. That morning, the day he fell, had started like any other. He remembered tying his boots slowly, back aching more than usual. Gita had sat by the door, waiting, ears perked. They didn't make it far, a patch of wet moss, a slip. Then pain. Blinding, immediate, all-consuming. He remembered trying to shout, remembered how the world tilted, how the leaves above him blurred, how the cold seeped into his spine. He remembered Gita's face above him. And then, nothing. The next thing he knew, he was blinking against hospital lights, her weight against his ribs. He looked at her now, still here, still watching. He leaned down and placed a hand on her head, fingers combing through her fur. "Thank you," he whispered. Outside, wind moved through the trees. That night, as the house settled and the fireplace crackled, he sat in his old recliner, Gita curled up beside him. He thought about the things they'd never said to each other, about the silence they'd always shared, and how, somehow, that had always been enough. Not every bond is made of words. Some are made of presence, of shared breath, of years passed without question. And sometimes when the world falls away and you find yourself alone on the forest floor, it's that presence that carries you back. He closed his eyes. Gita shifted closer, pressing her body against his leg. They didn't need anything else. They had always understood. And in the quiet of that room, as night deepened and the stars began to blink awake outside the window, they sat together, man and dog, survivor and sentinel, saved and savior, wrapped in the kind of silence that speaks the loudest. Weeks passed, and the leaves turned brittle gold. The trail behind the house, once a daily path for them, grew over with branches untrodden since the fall. The man walked with a cane now, slow and cautious, his body healed in segments like pieces of a puzzle fitting themselves back together in silence. But his heart, that was different. That had changed. He found himself watching Gita more closely. The tilt of her ears, the way she rose with a soft groan but never complained. She was slower too. The climb of age was visible now in the way she took stairs one at a time, in the longer pauses before she lay down. But her eyes were still bright. She followed him everywhere, from room to room, from porch to table, as if the moment she left him alone, something might go wrong again. And every time he looked into those eyes, something stirred. A weight, a knowing, a memory that never truly left him. It wasn't the fall itself he remembered most clearly, it was the helplessness, the realization that he couldn't get up, that his voice wouldn't carry, that his life could end in silence. And then it was her, Gita, standing above him like a question, and then leaving like an answer. He'd seen that same look once before, long ago, in the eyes of a stray dog near his childhood home. A hurricane had torn through their street. Sirens wailed for hours. And when the wind finally calmed, they found a neighbor, an old man, dead in his kitchen. His dog had howled all night, but no one had listened. He remembered that. He remembered how deeply it had unnerved him, even as a boy. He wondered now how many dogs had barked and been ignored, how many warnings had come in whimpers, in pacing, in refusal to move forward. How many lives could have changed if someone had just paid attention? It made him grateful in a way he didn't have words for. He didn't know how Gita had known what to do, but she had, and that truth had settled inside him like warmth. That evening, the deputy who had followed her through the woods stopped by. He brought dog treats in a paper bag and 2 cups of coffee. They sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the line of trees. "She looks good," the deputy said, tossing a treat into Gita's mouth. "She is good," the old man replied, his voice soft. The deputy hesitated, then leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I think about her sometimes," he said, "about that morning." The old man nodded. "I never believed that kind of thing before," the deputy continued. "Animals sensing things, doing something like that." "I did," the old man said. "I think I always did." They sat in silence for a long while, the way men sometimes do when the conversation is too big to hold with words. Gita dozed between them, belly rising and falling with steady breath. "She's something," the deputy said at last. "She's everything," the old man said. As the sky darkened, the deputy stood to leave. He paused before heading down the steps. "She saved your life?" The old man didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew. Later that night, the old man pulled an old photo album off a shelf. He hadn't opened it in years. He flipped through the pages slowly, pictures of his wife, their wedding, a dog they'd once had long ago. And then, near the back, he found the photo that had made the newspaper weeks ago. Gita curled up beside him in the hospital bed, her nose touching his arm. He took a pen and wrote one line beneath it. "She never barked. She didn't have to." He closed the book and placed it back on the shelf. Gita stirred, lifted her head, then dropped it again onto her paws. He leaned back, the fire casting shadows on the wall, and whispered into the warmth between them. "I heard you, Gita. I'll always hear you." And in that room, filled with silence, the kind only age and love can build, the bond between man and dog deepened, not in words, but in breath, in memory, and in the certainty that no act of love ever goes unnoticed, even when it comes in silence. The seasons rolled forward like a slow river, carving its shape into everything it touched. Winter settled in with a soft hand that year, brushing frost across the windows and silvering the tops of the trees. The man rose later now, his legs stiff, his breath fogging the morning glass. Gita rose too, but more slowly, more gently, as if she too had begun to feel time in her bones. She still followed him, every room, every step. She moved like a shadow with memory, quiet, loyal, patient. On some mornings they would sit together on the porch, wrapped in coats and old blankets, watching the fog lift from the trees like breath from the earth. The trail behind the house remained untouched, a soft blur of white where deer tracks occasionally crossed. He hadn't been back down it since the fall. He wasn't sure if he ever would. But Gita would sometimes wander to the edge, where the trees opened like a mouth to the past. She'd stand there, nose lifted, as if remembering too. Then she'd return, her paws barely brushing the snow. She'd begun to sleep more, and more deeply. Sometimes he'd watch her chest rise, then wait a beat too long for it to fall. She was 13 now, maybe more. She was still alert, still herself. But the stairs became harder, the porch colder. Her legs sometimes gave way when she stood too quickly. He carried her once, when her hips failed after a long nap. She hated it, growled softly, not at him, but at the betrayal of her own body. But she let him. They had both gotten old together, quietly, without ceremony. He'd once thought that love meant words, meant holding and saying and knowing, but Gita had taught him different. Love, it turned out, was watching, was being, was showing up, every day, without asking why. One morning in early spring, when the snow had just begun to melt from the edges of the yard, he opened the front door and paused. Gita didn't come. He turned, heart clenching. She lay by the fireplace, her body curled like always, her eyes closed. He walked over, slowly. Kneeling beside her, he laid a hand gently on her side, still warm, still breathing. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd held. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at him, for a long time. He didn't say anything, just nodded. She closed her eyes again. That night he sat with her for hours, his fingers in her fur, the fire painting long shadows across the walls. She passed away quietly just before dawn. No cry, no movement, just a final breath, and then stillness. He buried her beneath the trees, in the place where the trail began, the place she had once returned from, when no one else could have. He marked the spot with her old collar and a stone he carved himself. On it, he etched, "She found the way back, and she brought me with her." Neighbours came. So did the deputy. They brought flowers and warm food and stayed for a little while, but most left before sunset, giving him the silence he needed. That evening he sat by the fireplace alone, the house echoing a little more than before, but not empty. Never empty. He reached into the drawer by his chair and pulled out the photo album, turned to the last page, slipped in a picture, a new one, the collar on the stone, sunlight catching the edge. He wrote one last line beneath it. Sometimes the loudest warnings come in silence. He closed the book and sat with the silence and smiled.